Welcome to the Jacobson Flare AI Review podcast, featuring AI aces Jaybird Jaime and Fearless Frank. Master perfect landings in any aircraft with the Jacobson Flare app for iOS.
You know, when we learn to drive, we all go through that rite of passage, parallel parking.
Oh yeah, with the instructor just sitting there staring at you with a clipboard.
Right, exactly. But they actually teach you a specific formula. You line up your side mirror with their side mirror, you turn the wheel a quarter turn, back up, and straighten out. It's really just geometry.
Yeah, and as long as you follow those steps, the car fits into the spot. It's totally quantifiable. You don't have to be an artist to parallel park. You just follow the math.
But then you look at aviation, we're talking about incredibly complex machines. And when you look at how human beings are taught to land an airplane, well, that comforting geometry kind of just vanishes. For a century, the advice for bringing a plane down has basically been to just, to feel it.
Yeah, to rely on instinct.
Right. So today, our mission on this deep dive is to look into that, to take a step back from the mystery of landing an airplane and see how it can be replaced with solid geometry.
And we're pulling from a really interesting stack of sources for this one. We are mainly looking at a 2016 lecture by David Jacobson, who is a former Qantas Airways captain, along with the technical research behind his iOS application, which is called the Jacobson Flare app.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because to understand why applying a geometric formula is such a big deal, we need to establish the baseline of how pilots have been trained for generations. Landing has historically been treated as a bit of an elusive skill, right?
It really has. You are basically told to just do it over and over, relying on trial and error until your hands and eyes sort of figure it out.
Which seems surprisingly subjective for such a technical field.
It is very subjective.
Yeah.
You're in the cockpit, and the flight instructor essentially tells you to, look out the window until the ground looks right and then pull back. When you consider the aerodynamic progress we've made, we have GPS, fly-by-wire automation. The manual technique of judging a landing is remarkably unchanged since the days of biplanes in 1918.
And there's a piece of evidence from Jacobson's research that highlights how stagnant this training has been. He looked at two different editions of an Australian flight instructor manual, one from 1975 and the other from 2006.
That is a 30-year gap in technology.
Exactly. We went from early jets to heavily computerized flight decks. Yet both manuals contain the exact same paragraphs, word for word, stating that mastering the landing is a, quote, matter of judgment.
Which is really just another way of saying they couldn't clearly define how to teach it. They were leaving it up to intuition. And relying on subjective judgment is a flawed premise. Human beings experience fatigue. We get stressed. And our optical perception is actually incredibly easy to distort.
You mean our eyes get tricked?
Yeah, when you tell a student to rely on a feel for the ground, you're trusting a sensory system that gets confused by the outside environment all the time.
I do want to push back on this a little bit, though, because we all have this image of the seasoned pilot, right? The ace who just knows their machine. If we strip away the art of flying, do we turn highly trained professionals into robots?
Well, it's a common perspective. But relying on art in aviation is often an excuse for inconsistency. A pilot leaning on intuition might have a smooth landing one day and a heavy one the next, without really understanding the mechanics behind either. True mastery is having an objective mathematical anchor that you can trust, especially when your eyes might be feeding you incorrect information.
Okay, so the environment can trick the pilot's eyes. I get how that happens in heavy fog, but the research points out this happens on clear, sunny days, too. How does a runway trick your eyes?
It comes down to the physical dimensions of the runway itself. Let's say a pilot is used to landing on a standard 45-meter wide runway. Their brain gets used to that specific visual picture. Then they fly into an airport with a runway that is unusually wide.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, visually, that extra asphalt tricks the depth perception. It makes the pilot believe they are much closer to the ground than they actually are.
Because the runway is filling up their peripheral vision earlier than expected, so the brain says, hey, we must be inches away.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the natural reaction is to initiate the flare, which is pulling the nose up to settle onto the runway way too early. The aircraft ends up floating, bleeding off airspeed, and then dropping for a hard landing.
And Jacobson notes that the opposite scenario is actually much more common and presents more of a risk.
Right. Take a narrow runway, like the 30-meter strip at Ayers Rock in Australia. That narrowness creates the illusion that the aircraft is higher up than it truly is. The pilot looks out, thinks they have plenty of altitude, and they wait too long to flare.
Oh, wow. So they could end up coming down way too hard on the tarmac.
Yes. By trusting their feel, they risk a severe impact.
That really dismantles the idea of relying on artistic feel. If the asphalt itself can trick your depth perception, you need something better. And to find that objective anchor, Jacobson didn't actually look at modern aerodynamics. He went back to World War II.
Yeah, he found inspiration in the 1943 Royal Air Force Dam Busters operation. It's a masterclass in solving a spatial problem with geometry. These pilots had to drop skipping bombs to breach enemy dams, and the bomb had to be released exactly 60 feet above the water.
Not 55 feet, not 65 feet, exactly 60. And they had to do it in the pitch black of night, over smooth water, which completely destroys human depth perception.
Right, and the barometric altimeters of the 1940s were useless for measuring an altitude of 60 feet. If they relied on visual feel over dark water, it would have failed. So they used triangulation. The engineers mounted 2 spotlights on the aircraft, one under the nose, one under the belly.
I love this part.
They angled the beams downward so they would intersect precisely 60 feet below the plane.
It's so clever. When the navigator saw a perfect figure 8 of light on the water, they knew with absolute mathematical certainty they were at 60 feet. Human perception was totally removed from the equation. And this leads to Jacobson's breakthrough, because he realized the modern cockpit actually has a built-in triangulation system.
Exactly. We don't need spotlights because we already have intersecting lines. An airplane approaches a runway on a gentle slope, typically a 3-degree glide path. Jacobson connected that downward path to the fixed physical structure of the cockpit. Every airplane has what is known as a cockpit lower visual cutoff angle.
Which sounds super technical, but it's really just the point where the dashboard or the glare shield blocks your view of the ground over the nose. You're looking out and you can't see the pavement immediately below because the dashboard is in the way.
Right. You have the downward flight path and you have the fixed angle of the dashboard cutting off your view. Those are your 2 intersecting lines. As the plane flies down toward an aim point on the runway, the dashboard appears to move steadily up the runway toward a specific target.
And when the dashboard completely eclipses that point on the runway, you have reached a mathematically predictable height. That eclipse is your visual fix.
Yes, exactly like the Dam Buster spotlights.
And here's a crucial detail from the sources that we really need to emphasize for you listening. This isn't something the pilot is calculating on the fly.
No, definitely not.
The specific aim point and that target flare cutoff point on the runway are pre-calculated at home just one time only for each individual airplane type and variant.
That is a very vital distinction. The geometry is a fixed constant. A pilot locks in these visual markers before they ever start the engines. They're just waiting for pre-calculated physical lines to intersect in their vision.
There's an anecdote in the sources that shows how intuitive this is. In 1993, Jacobson had his 86-year-old mother, Dossie, sit in the jump seat of a Boeing 737. She knew nothing about flying. It was dark and raining. He just told her to look at the dashboard and tap him on the shoulder at the exact millisecond. The edge of the dashboard covered the white paint marks on the runway.
She identified the moment perfectly. She wasn't guessing the altitude. She was just observing 2 lines crossing. It outsources human depth perception to the rigid geometry of the machine.
Spotting that fix is great, but why is picking a horizontal target on the ground safer than a pilot trying to judge their vertical height in the air? How does the math protect the aircraft?
Well, it comes down to the gradient of that 3-degree glide path. In practical terms, a 3-degree slope equates to a 1 in 20 gradient.
Okay, let's visualize that. It's like driving down a massive, incredibly long ramp that is barely tilted. For every 20 feet you drive forward, you only drop 1 foot in actual vertical height. It's very shallow.
And that shallow descent is what makes the feel method so problematic. When a pilot tries to guess their vertical height, they are fighting that 1 in 20 ratio. If they misjudge their vertical height by just 1 single foot, the airplane travels 20 feet further horizontally down the runway before touching down.
So a tiny 1-foot vertical mistake compounds into a 20-foot horizontal error. That explains why commercial flights sometimes float endlessly down the runway before touching down. The pilot's brain is just a few inches off.
Right, the traditional method relies on an unforgiving margin of error, but the Jacobson Flare flips that math. By using the runway as a visible ruler and waiting for the dashboard to eclipse that pre-calculated target, you reverse the equation.
Because now you're judging a horizontal distance on the ground. If you misjudge the cutoff point by a full 100 feet on the runway, because of that 1 to 20 ratio, that massive 100-foot error on the ground translates to a mere 5-foot vertical error in the air.
Exactly. It creates a foundation that forgives minor perceptual errors. But identifying the trigger is only half the maneuver. The pilot still has to physically execute the landing correctly.
Right. And traditional training often just vaguely suggests pulling back on the stick. Jacobson actually dissected the physical maneuver into 5 specific elements.
Yes, 5 elements. You can't just float down haphazardly. The first element is where to aim.
Which means picking a specific target.
Exactly. Establishing a definitive point early in the approach, like the top piano keys painted at the threshold, rather than just aiming generally for the concrete. Then the second element is how to aim.
How to aim, meaning keeping the plane on the right path.
Right. Establishing a stable, unvarying flight path. The pilot applies the elevators to aim their eyes accurately at the aim point and uses power to control the pre-calculated approach airspeed. That locks in the 3-degree glide path.
Okay, so that brings us to the third element, which is when to flare.
And that is the visual fix we just talked about.
Yeah.
The exact moment the dashboard eclipses the pre-calculated target flare cutoff point.
Then we get to elements 4 and 5, which deal with the physical action, how much to flare and how fast to flare. And Jacobson combined these into a standardized timing, right?
Yes, based on 30 years of stopwatch timing. Once the visual fix is hit, the pilot reduces engine power to idle, and then smoothly, continuously raises their line of sight from the original aim point to a second down point far down the runway. And they do this over a slow internal count of 1, 2, 3, 4.
That disciplined 4-second count is huge. Because historically, pilots on some heavy jets would get anxious about flaring at the correct height. Instead of a smooth transition, they would initiate a tiny partial flare way too early and just hold it there.
Yeah, and by enforcing a deliberate 4-second count and bringing power to idle, it eliminates that anxiety-driven reaction entirely.
It makes sense to standardize the timing, but how can a universal 4-second count apply equally to a tiny Cessna and a massive Boeing jetliner? They have totally different weights.
It's all about physics. Counting evenly to 4 naturally creates an exponential curve in the vertical flight path.
It's kind of like braking smoothly at a red light. If you slam the brakes, you spill your coffee. But if you apply steady pressure over a few seconds, the car decelerates on a smooth curve until it stops.
That's a great analogy. In second 1 of the flare, the plane might be dropping at 10 feet per second. But as the nose steadily pitches up through seconds 2, 3, and 4, momentary lift is generated. By second 4, the descent is flattened out to just a few inches per second.
So the gear just smoothly touches the runway.
Exactly. It scales perfectly.
There is a quote from the sources. The airplane politely follows your eyes.
It's a perfect summary. And we have real-world proof. Take an Airbus A380, a 360-ton double-decker aircraft. The sources mention a pilot named Gary, who flew one from Hong Kong to Sydney.
Using the visual fix and the 4-second count?
Yes. And the landing was so seamless that when reviewing the raw data recorder and GoPro footage, they literally could not pinpoint the exact millisecond the massive plane touched the tarmac. The descent rate approached 0.
And a Virgin Australia 737 pilot noted using it as well. What's amazing is how accessible this has become. All this history and math has been packaged into the iOS app.
It's very accessible. It costs about the same as a single rented practice circuit in an airplane.
It provides a permanent foundation for a skill that used to take decades of trial and error to refine.
It replaces subjective guesswork with triangulation, a pre-calculated visual fix, and a 4-second curve.
So next time you are looking out the window of a commercial flight and experience a smooth touchdown, you will know what is happening in the cockpit. It isn't just an artistic instinct, it's a perfectly executed piece of geometry and a quiet 4-second countdown.
You're experiencing applied math in action.
Absolutely. And it leaves us with a final thought to mull over. If a high-stakes skill, like landing a massive airplane, can be stripped of its mystique and boiled down to a few pre-calculated intersecting lines and a 4-second count, what other instinct-based professional skills in our daily lives are just waiting for their own mathematical light bulb moment?
That is an excellent question to think about.
Thanks for joining us. We'll catch you on the next Deep Dive.